Ah, Peter Molyneux. These days, a man whose involvement in something isn't just an ordinary red flag, it's a red flag you can befriend, marry, and see the ethical choices you made in life be reflected by the behaviour of your tiny red flag children. Disclaimer: some, or indeed all of these features, may not make it to the final product. But in this era of picking through every last line of a pre-release interview for dubious claims, we forget that there was a time in the 90s where Molyneux and Bullfrog reigned supreme, where nearly every game took players in an exciting new direction and was an enormous hit. Although we might have maintained that narrative by conveniently erasing High Octane from the history books. Nitpicking historians may point out this era contained just as many Molyneuxisms. For example, Syndicate's agents were originally supposed to get bored and wander off if you made them too intelligent. However, we didn't care, and the games regularly racked up 90% and 9 out of 10s. And don't forget, that was before magazine rating scales started at 6. Perhaps we didn't get so caught up in the hype, when the hype required you to go to an actual newsagent and spend cash to read it. It also helps that Bullfrog's first hit was so seminal, it coined the phrase God Game. I'm talking, as the video's title might suggest, about Populous. Populous wouldn't exist were it not for some classic Molyneux promises and grifting. Or at least that's how the official story goes. After a disastrous early attempt at self-publishing games, which resulted in an entire 2 copies sold, one of which Molyneux suspects was his own mother, he formed a company called Taurus Impex, which, according to Molyneux, exported baked beans to the Middle East. It's unknown whether choices you made in the game affected the flavour of the beans. It's also unknown quite how core baked beans really were to the Taurus business. Much of their core income may in fact have come from contract software development and database work, with the baked bean scheme merely a wheeze that later sounded good as an origin story. It also makes the next step a little more plausible. In Molyneux's account, Taurus sounded notably similar to early business software company Taurus. But other accounts suggest the Taurus concern was in fact a plumbing company, and Commodore thought the Amiga would be perfect for doing data analysis for them. In which case, ringing up Taurus Impex the IT company, as opposed to Taurus Impex the baked bean shop, might have been a little more sensible. Whatever the cause, this led to Molyneux getting a call from Commodore in the mid-80s, asking if they'd developed some software for their new Amiga machine. Of course, the honest thing to do would be to say, "Sorry, wrong company, you're looking for Taurus, we export baked beans," and pass on getting your hands on some dubiously attained hardware. So, of course, several Amigas were shipped to Molyneux's Taurus Impex, and they set to creating a simple piece of database software to keep up their end of the deal. This was followed by a conversion of the C64 Gauntlet clone, Druid 2, after a chance meeting with the original developer in the pub. At this point, Molyneux and business partner Les Edgar spun off Bullfrog Productions to create games, and if you know your Latin, you'll spot a sly pun in that name. Their first original game was Fusion, which, while it sold more than 2 copies, was not a commercial success. It's unknown how many copies Peter's mum bought. For their next game, Bullfrog envisaged a sort of island-based strategy game. Molyneux said that he originally promised intelligent AI, where the game's walkers would make smart choices about how they navigated the island. However, in reality, early versions of the code couldn't even navigate shorelines properly, meaning the player had to raise land for their walkers to walk on. At least, that's Molyneux's story. There's some debate as to whether this clumsily accidental origin was really the case. According to programmer Glenn Corpse, the landscape editor was already running on his own Atari ST, long before Molyneux saw it for the first time. But however Populous came to be, the result turned out to be rather fun and addictive. Molyneux sold the publishing rights to Electronic Arts for an abysmal publishing deal, where Bullfrog wouldn't see any money at all until 9 months after the game was released. I guess if you're normally expecting to sell 2 copies, then you don't worry about such things. Luckily for Bullfrog, Molyneux was quite happy to make outlandish promises to his credit card company, mortgage provider, and anybody else who could be persuaded to let bill payments slide a few months until those royalty payments came through. Luckily for all concerned, that was one promise which did come true. Populous was an enormous sales success, and Bullfrog made sure they stayed in the public's attention by quickly releasing follow-up games and courting the gaming press by taking them on notoriously riotous pub trips and giving interviews on the toilet. It was ported to a plethora of 16-bit systems, and even a couple of 8-bit ones. Anyway, let's play some Populous. First thing to note about the PC port is that unusually for a game with this vintage, it has VGA and sound card support. Check out the excellent Populous song. Alright, expectations were a bit lower back in the PC speaker in EGA days. And it's noticeable that while the game has VGA support, it's not using much more than the basic EGA colour palette. Although it's used well, and doesn't suffer from the garish nature of some Amiga ports. The aim of Populous is to defeat the other walkers, whose stylish red threads are causing your blue-attired folk to come in second place every time they enter a fashion show. I might have made that up. There wasn't really much plot until Populous 2. You fight across hundreds of procedurally generated worlds until the game puts up a cursory win screen. To win, you need more and stronger walkers than the other side. Walkers are produced in houses, which need flat land. Larger houses need more land, but they produce stronger walkers. The walkers level up faster in a larger house, but because the end level is higher, this takes a long time, and you don't get new walkers to roam and settle the land. So players quickly learnt to sprog walkers by raising and lowering land to resize property, resulting in lots of medium-strength walkers quickly colonising the map, until it was full of castles pumping out high-strength walkers. And by the way, while I say sprog and walker, Peter Molyneux would prefer that you say nippling the land and peeps. In order to really dust up your opponent, you can create a knight, a sort of super unit, which can win battle after battle. To make a strong knight, you get all of your walkers to merge into the leader, until this strength icon shows a suitably high-powered offensive weapon. This does mean you have fewer walkers available for settling and growing your lands, so it's a careful compromise between offence and growth. Let your knight wander over to the enemy lands and they'll start beating people up and shaking them down. In order to do all of these things, we need mana. Mana increases over time, and you get more if you have more walkers. In addition to moving land and making knights, we also have plenty of griefing tools to go and interfere with the computer player. Swamps are particularly effective. They're cheap, meaning you can place multiple swamps to muck up Red's day and force them to spend mana, cleaning up your mess. Wearing down the enemy with knights and griefing can take time, so if we have huge amounts of mana, there's also this Armageddon option, which stops everything for a last one standing battle in the middle of the map. I've played more than a few Commander Game Continues battles in Total Annihilation, where I wish I had this tool, while I spent half an hour searching for the last metal extractor. And that's it. It's an early game, and therefore quite simple, but that doesn't stop it being very addictive and playable. Later levels will take away some of your tools, so you're forced to play differently, and you'll play on different terrains which reduce the amount of time walkers can survive outside of a house. But this is pretty much all the depth there is. Easy to learn, hard to master, as they say. One thing I don't like so much is later levels hit the curse of so many early games. Because computers weren't powerful enough to play as skillfully as a good human player, the AI gets some unfair advantages, such as boosts to mana and knight strength. Which does get annoying when it's able to churn out knight after knight, despite only having a few houses. Sometimes you're better off speedrunning your way to Armageddon before the first fight, assuming it's available. But this is a modern expectation that the AI will give you a fair challenge, You can always connect up another computer with a null modem cable if you want a fair fight against someone good at the game. And this was a really good game. It deserved all of those sales, even if the expansion pack The Promised Lands only swapped some sprites and didn't give anything in the way of new gameplay. The origin story might have a few embellishments to make it sound a little more dashing, but like so much of Bullfrog's early output, the game itself is great. And as for Taurus MPEX, Baked Beans and Amigas, it is a great story, even if it's not obvious whether to file it under history or fiction.